It's 7:09 a.m. on May 23, 1977. A train suddenly screeches to a stop near the quiet Dutch village of De Punt. 8 young people storm aboard. One of them, Max Papilaya, shouts to the terrified passengers, "This is a hijacking!" At the exact same time, far away in a small school in Bovensmilde, 4 other armed youth take 105 children and their teachers hostage. Why are these young people, some barely out of school, risking everything? What pushed them to target innocent passengers and children? This is not a random attack. It's a desperate cry from a forgotten community, angry at the Dutch government and longing for a country they were never allowed to return to. But what begins as a protest will end in bullets, flames, and decades of questions. Were the hijackers dangerous terrorists or victims of broken promises? And did the Dutch government order their deaths to hide a bigger truth? Before we dive into the topic, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Unsolved for more incredible stories from history. To understand the hijacking, we need to go back decades. The South Moluccas are a group of islands in Indonesia. For over 300 years, the Dutch colonized Indonesia. Many Moluccans, mostly Christian, were loyal to the Dutch and served in their army. But in 1949, after years of war, the Dutch left Indonesia. They promised the Moluccans their own independent republic. That promise was never kept. Indonesia quickly invaded the South Moluccas and crushed the dream of independence. Many Moluccan soldiers and their families were stranded. The Dutch brought around 12,000 of them to the Netherlands, saying it was just temporary. But temporary became permanent. They were placed in old army camps, cut off from Dutch society, not allowed to work, and forgotten by the government. They protested peacefully for years. Nothing changed. The children of those soldiers grew up watching their parents suffer in silence. They grew bitter, angry, and some believed that peaceful protests had failed. On the morning of May 23, 1977, 8 young South Moluccan men, armed and determined, hijacked a train traveling between Assen and Groningen. As the train approached the quiet village of De Punt, it was forced to a sudden stop when the hijackers pulled the emergency brake. Panic spread through the carriages as passengers were ordered to stay in their seats. This was no robbery. It was a political act. The group was led by Max Papilaya, just 25 years old. By profession, Max was a civil servant, a calm, well-educated young man who had never committed a violent crime. Beside him stood Hansina Uktolseja, a soft-spoken dental assistant with no history of political activism. But that morning, she held a rifle in her hands and a powerful message in her heart. Before leaving home, she wrote a letter to her parents. "I'm not afraid to die. If I get shot, that's okay. It won't be for nothing." At the very same time in the town of Bovensmilde, 4 more young Moluccans entered an elementary school, armed with weapons and fear. They took more than 100 children and teachers hostage. Some of the children were only in their first year of school. The 2 attacks were no coincidence. They were part of a carefully coordinated plan that had been months in the making. The hijackers issued their demands: the release of 21 South Moluccan prisoners, jailed for earlier political actions, a bus to transport them safely to an airport, a plane that would fly them to a destination of their choice. They gave the government 48 hours to meet these demands. If not, they warned, they would use violence, starting with a grenade thrown among the children. The deadline had begun ticking. A nation held its breath. The hijackers quickly released some hostages, mainly elderly people and non-Dutch passengers. They wanted to show the government they were serious, but not out to kill without cause. Negotiators began talking with the hijackers through a phone line. Food was delivered to the train more than 50 times. Meanwhile, at the school, children were made to chant demands out the windows. Some became sick from the stress and fear. After days of negotiation, the hijackers agreed to release all the children from the school. In return, the Dutch negotiators gave them hope. Safe passage might be granted, but this promise would not be kept. The government had no plans to let the hijackers leave the country. They wanted to end the standoff by force, but needed time to plan. At the train, life settled into a strange routine. Hostages did morning exercises. Games were played. Tasks were assigned. But underneath the surface, everyone knew violence could come at any time. Elsewhere, Dutch military teams prepared for war. Snipers studied the train using heat cameras. Plans were drawn up. Fighter jets were placed on standby. On June 11th at 4:54 a.m., after 482 hours, the Dutch Marines launched their attack. 6 fighter jets roared over the train to disorient the hijackers. Under the cover of the noise, frogmen set off loud explosions beside the tracks. Then, snipers opened fire, targeting areas they believed the hijackers slept. Seconds later, 5 groups of Dutch Marines stormed the train. They carried revolvers loaded with hollow-point bullets, which explode inside the body, making them deadly but banned in war. Inside the train, chaos erupted. One hijacker, Rudy, tried to reach the hostages. Another, Hansina, was already injured. When a Marine found her alive but wounded, she whispered, "Mama, Mama." Then he shot her again at close range. The operation was over in just 180 seconds. 6 of the 8 hijackers were killed. Only 2 survived. 1 hostage was killed accidentally, and several were injured. At the school, the hijackers surrendered peacefully. The Dutch Marines were celebrated as heroes. Newspapers praised their bravery. But behind the scenes, something was off. The families of the dead hijackers were given sealed coffins. They weren't allowed to see the bodies. Journalists couldn't inspect the train. And the 2 surviving hijackers received surprisingly light sentences, raising eyebrows. In 2000, things changed. A journalist found secret autopsy reports. They revealed Hansina was shot with a revolver at close range. Max had burn marks on his skin, showing he was also shot at extremely close distance. Neither had fired at the Marines' secret audio tapes were discovered. In them, one Marine said, "Is he dead?" "Yes, now he is. I shot them both to pieces." These tapes had never been released to the public. In 2014, the families sued the Dutch government. The key question, were the hijackers executed after surrendering? The government denied it. Judges ruled in their favor, saying the situation was chaotic and the Marines couldn't know who was still a threat. But 2 questions were never answered. Why did 2 hijackers have gunpowder burns if they were shot from far away? Why were their bodies hidden from family and the public? Who was right? Some people say the hijackers were terrorists. They threatened to kill children and passengers. The Marines, they argue, saved lives under extreme pressure. Others say the hijackers were desperate young people, pushed to extremes after years of broken promises. They believe the government could have arrested them and instead chose to cover up the truth. Even today, many South Moluccans remember Max and Hansina not as terrorists, but as resistance fighters. They are buried side by side, not far from where they were killed. On their shared grave is written the phrase, "Laha Vahala," keep moving forward, never step back. This story is about more than a hijacking. It's about how history, broken promises, and silence can lead to violence. And it's about what governments are willing to hide to protect their image. Were the Marines heroes? Were the hijackers victims? Or was the truth buried with the bodies? You decide. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe the channel.